I've been living in poverty for almost 10 years, and my community is horrible. It looks like it has been ransacked. There are some good things about my community, though, like some of the people. Most of the teenage guys, maybe 50%, are high school dropouts. Not me, though. I have high expectations of going to college. And this was written by an 8th grader. This 8th grader went on to say that the reason why he wanted to go to college was because he wanted to return to his community to make sure everybody had a heater and air conditioning and to build a park and playground in his community. Now, a heater and air conditioner, that's something that we all take for granted. And I'm sure that if, this kid lives in South Carolina, so I'm sure that a lot of us in this room, if we went to work in South Carolina heat and they had no air conditioner, we would refuse to work in that environment. But we have this kid who has to study and do everything that his counterparts are doing in an environment like this, and he's driven, he knows the importance. And so these were the kids that I really wanted to help with this report and also with this panel. I don't want us to just keep talking about the problem, and we talk about the problem a lot. But there are solutions out there. There are solutions on the policy level, there's solutions at the state level, there's solutions at the grassroots level, and there's solutions that correspond with the number of people in this room. So with that introduction of myself and my work, I'm going to now introduce my panel. The first person I'm quite honored to introduce, I remember when I was in graduate school, I was working on a master's at Penn State, and my aunt gave me a book on tape, and that book was called Make Me Wanna Holler. And I remember listening to that book read by the author on my way from rural State College, Pennsylvania, to New York. And that book kept me up on the trip there and on the trip back. And I distinctly remember returning to Penn State at maybe about 3 o'clock in the morning, but I had maybe 30 minutes left on that book, and I stayed in my car and I finished listening to that book. The book is very profound. But this is Nathan McCall, who's an author, best-selling author, who wrote about working as a journalist after serving 3 years in prison. He reported for the Virginian Pilot Ledger Star and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution before moving to the Washington Post in 1989. He took a leave of absence from the Post to write his first book, Make Me Wanna Holler, an autobiography that traces his journey from Portsmouth to prison, to rehabilitation, and on to success in the newspaper industry. I remember me and one of my colleagues was arguing over whether the book was called Make Me Wanna Holler or Make Me Wanna Holler. But it's actually Make Me Wanna Holler. I'm sure the publishers had something to do with that, flush out the ebonics. The next person I want to introduce is Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, who you might recognize as a news commentary. He's one of the most reasonable voices on Fox News. They fight him and he fights back. And so I watch him on the news like I'm watching a boxing match, like, go Mark, stick it to Bill O'Reilly as he says all that crazy stuff. But he's one of the youngest members of a growing body of hip-hop intellectuals in the country, and his work covers topics such as hip-hop culture, politics, sexuality, and education and religion. He has appeared in numerous journals, magazines, books, and anthologies. Dr. Hill lectures widely across the nation, and he does regular commentary on media outlets like NPR, Washington Post, Essence Magazine, and New York Times. And he's currently a political contributor to the Fox News station. And he regularly appears on programs like The O'Reilly Factor and Hannity and Combs. And he's a better man than me because I would have to get physical with those brothers. Not brothers, but I would have to get physical with them. And some of the stuff that spew out of their mouth, but he keeps us cool. and he keeps it intellectual, and he represents us well. So, so I welcome him to the panel. Before I read the next two, give both Brother Nathan McCall and Dr. Lamont Hill a round of applause. Next brother I want to introduce is Rufus Williams, who's a product of the Chicago Public Schools and parent of a public school graduate. He's now president of the Chicago School Board, and he also serves as a president and chief executive officer of Olympus, a business management and contract negotiation firm, and he has a lifetime of giving back to the community and the school system, and has laid the foundation for his success. Mr. Williams has launched a variety of programs aimed at providing Chicago public school students the opportunity for achievement, such as a shoe donation fund for scholar athletes, the Real Men Read literacy and mentoring program, and expansion of the Having a Ballroom Dancing initiative. And so please give it up for Brother Rufus Williams. Next brother I want to introduce is Dr. James Moore. I started talking to James Moore probably about a year ago, preceding the last ALC, where he envisioned a panel on education, and we weren't quite able to make it happen last year. But this year we were able to make it happen, and I reached out to him early, and he helped to conceptualize this. He helped to bring this panel into existence. And he also helped in the development of the Breaking Barriers report. He was the editor of a special edition of the, and I don't know if that's on your bio, but what was that? What was the journal that you was the editor of?
We guest edited two, actually. One in Teachers College Record, a referee publication, and the last one just came out was American Behavioral Science.
Right, and this was an entire edition of a scholarly publication that was devoted to African American male achievement. He was one of the first readers of the Breaking Barriers report. He edited it well. He provided much insight to bring it to the shape that it's in now. And he also wrote an op-ed piece that's been very widely received. He's the inaugural director of the Ohio State University's Todd Anthony Bell National Resource Center for African American Males. And so he'll have an opportunity to tell you a little bit more about that. So please give it up for Brother James Moore. And the last person I want to introduce is taking David Miller's place, who had to be out of the country right now. But this young brother right here is a doctoral student in counseling psychology at Howard University. He recently completed his master's degree in counseling psychology, and his thesis was called African American Adolescent Males Involvement in the Juvenile Justice System, an Exploratory Analysis that looked at the profiles of over 1,000 kids, and he had lots of academic success indicators in that. It was a solution-oriented paper. He recently got accepted for a publication, an article entitled The Black Church and Spirituality, an Effective Means in Counseling African American Adolescent Males. Some of the other brothers up here who work in graduate programs, specifically in psychology, knows what a premium African American male scholars are in the field. We have a lot of large universities throwing money at them, and so sometimes it's hard for Howard to compete, but we're glad to have a brother like that of that caliber in our doctoral program. So please give it up for Brother Ryan Sutton. Okay, at this point I want to take a pause and allow the panel the opportunity to introduce themselves further and speak specifically about the topic that we're addressing today, and that's the proper education of African American males, paying specific attention to what are some of the solutions out there, defining the problems clearly, what are some policies that need to change, and all of this from your own perspective. So we'll start with you, Brother McCall.
Should I come up here?
You can stay seated, you can take the mic and walk around however you want to.
Good morning. When I think of the challenges related to educating black males, I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes from Carter G. Woodson. I often use this quote when talking with young black men in various settings, and I would like to share it with you this morning. Carter G. Woodson said, "When you can control what a man will think, you never have to be concerned with what he will do. When you can make a man feel inferior, you never have to compel him to seek an inferior, for he will seek it himself. When you can make a man feel justly outcast, you never have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no door, his very nature will demand one." I know we're going to have a panel discussion, and so I'm going to hold most of my remarks for that, but just in a nutshell, in my observation based on my own life and the lives of many other black males that I've known and talked with and spent time with, if I could summarize it in a nutshell, I would probably focus the challenge of educating black males on two areas. One is that it's my sense that for many black males, education is not viewed as a masculine endeavor. And you know as well as I do that masculinity is such an important issue in the minds of black men. And the second point that I would make, and I'm sure we'll discuss, is that it's my sense that entertainment, whether it be through sports, music, or whatever, has trumped education in the minds of many black men as the road to success. And so, as I said, I know we're going to have a discussion here, and so I look forward to the exchange and the opportunity to elaborate on those. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good. It's good to be here. Thank you again for inviting me and for that generous introduction. I come here not so much in the capacity of someone who thinks about politics or as a political commentator, but more as an anthropologist of education in particular, thinking about actually some of the issues that Brother Nathan just raised and linking them to some other issues that I have concern about, and as he did, I'll sort of save the bulk of my commentary for the broader dialogue. But the first thing that I think we need to talk about is what the fundamental role, purpose, and function of education is in American society today. I think we need to understand the crisis of education among black males. We must understand the nature of the threat, the nature of the problem. Not the sort of idealized conception of what education is as the great equalizer, as the thing that will get you from broke to rich, or the thing that will get you from, you know, sort of the shelter to the mansion. I mean, those are sort of American ideals that we know don't hold forth. Empirically, we know education isn't always a great equalizer. It helps, but there's some other issues that make it difficult for education to work for you, or even to have access to quality education. We know that. So I think part of what the fundamental issue is to figure out why is it that education, and more particularly schooling, doesn't work for African American males. And I think to do that, we have to link that to a broader set of issues and problems in the world. We can't talk about the crisis of education without talking about the crisis of healthcare, without talking about the crisis of housing, without talking about the prison industry, because all of these things are intimately linked. Just to give you one example, I walk into a school to do research, and it's a school that is a disciplinary school. It's a school that you get sent to if you violate the zero tolerance policy of the public school. So, which is probably another issue. There's a war on youth going on, right? There's an actual war on youth with what youth wear, what youth do, where youth stand, how youth perform culture. All these things are under a threat. They're being actually legislated against. And so you have a 5-year-old, you have a girl like Shaquana Cotton in Texas who pushes a hall monitor and ends up in a juvenile facility for up to 7 years. Right? I mean, this is what we're dealing with. But this school in particular, there were kids in there, first graders, who pulled a pair of scissors out. 8-year-old little girls who scream at their teacher. It's not right, but it's developmentally appropriate. They scream at their teacher, and the next thing we know, they're getting arrested for disorderly conduct. And so this is part of the threat. Our developmentally appropriate behavior is being legislated against. But these people get sent to this school. And I walk into the school, and you can't bring anything into school. No books. You can bring in one sheet of paper. You can't bring in money. You think you can bring in bills, no change, and I think up to like $3 or $4. You can't even bring in a coat. So no homework comes in, no homework comes out. No books go in, no books go out. This is the school. There's a big sign up here that says, be here, behave, be learning. Right? The grammaticality of it aside, right, there's a more fundamental question of how can one have a nurturing educational environment when it is not, as Dewey imagined, as a training ground for democracy, but instead a preparation pen for prison. Surveillance cameras. Public schools spent more money on surveillance equipment than prisons did in the last 5 years. This is the issue that we're dealing with. So we have to look at how the schooling industry and the schooling industrial complex is linked to issues of prison and profit making and privatization. And then finally, as I pass this thing over, we also need to look at what happens once we get into school. For the kids who actually make it into the school with some sense of health, with some sense of sanity, and with plenty of desire to be learners, when they get in that classroom, what happens? What kind of curriculum do we have in place for them? What do we have that is responsive to their needs, to their values, to their expectations, to their beliefs about the world? Because quite honestly, a whole bunch of brothers and sisters don't think, but particularly brothers today, don't think school works because it don't. So we need to figure out a way not just to get them to believe in education, but to make education something valuable and viable, curricularly, pedagogically, structurally, policy-wise, so that when they get in there, they can get something out. I'll stop there so we can have a broader conversation, but thank you again.
Good morning. I'm Rufus Williams, appropriately the president of the school board after that commentary. I just have to say, tell me that wasn't one of the Chicago public schools that you visited.
No.
Okay. No, it couldn't be. Because if it was, we'd change it today. Let me say, I am pleased to be here and pleased to talk about this subject. As Nathan was reading through the quote from Carter G. Woodson, I was halfway through writing that quote down because I was going to begin with the same thing. And I actually had this morning in my hand my dog-eared copy of The Miseducation of the Negro from 1990, which I read when my son was 2 years old. He read it when he was in high school, the same copy, and highlighted some things that I hadn't highlighted, and we talked about it. And when I read the book, I was first concerned about the fact that the book was written in 1933, and it was still appropriate in 1990. When my son read it 2-3 years ago, it was still appropriate then. It is a very unfortunate thing, but it's all characterized by that first passage. By that first passage. If there is not a back door, you will demand that one be created. It's a paradigm that we have to change, that we must change. Just to speak from an educational standpoint, I am perpetually troubled by the plight of our young brothers. I will tell you, just as I mentioned that I have a son, this troubles me more so because one of the things that I told my son early on was that I have one expectation of him. It is to be better than everybody at everything. And in saying that, I also told him that I didn't intend to put pressure on him, but I just felt that he could do that and that I would do everything I could to make sure that he could be successful there. And as we move forward, I think that so far, he is living up to his expectations of himself as he moves through life. I think it is that level of expectation that we have to elevate our young men to so that we get away from the notion that you can't do or that society teaches you something else. I will tell you that my son knows all of he knows all the hip-hop records. He'd sit and study with music on, with the TV on, talking to 8 different people on MySpace. but he was bringing home A's, and so I couldn't debate it. I just thought he was practicing multitasking. And as we listened to some of the most vile language in some of these songs, I wasn't as troubled because he understood the limit, he understood the boundary, he understood what that meant, and he understood that when his mother was in the car, we listened to something entirely different. I think that as we go, as we look, and as we teach them, as we prepare our young men, we have to prepare them to deal in a global society, and we have to make sure that they understand that they are better than everyone else. And we have to continue to support and push that notion. The unfortunate reality is I only had one son. So as I now try to move our system in Chicago, just to give you a sense of who we are, Chicago is the third largest school district in the nation. We have 405,000 students, 49% of them are African American, 38% are Latino, 8% are white, 3% are Asian. We have 45,000 employees, 27,000 teachers. We have a budget of $6 billion. 85% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. I won't go through a lot of the other things, but I'll tell you one of the interesting things that we've noted in school is that attendance matters. It didn't take us a study. We just looked and determined that if they weren't in school, we couldn't teach them. So we focused hard and focused heavy on getting children in school, getting them there. And we started doing this on a real focused basis in 2000. And our first day attendance in 2000 was 76%. This year, we had our highest ever first day attendance at 93.7%. It's also curious when we start to look at these statistics, the students in 8th grade, the attendance of black youth the attendance of black youth in 8th grade is about 92%. In 9th grade, it drops to 73%. And we have to ask why, what's going on. We know that there is, at that 13, 14-year-old point, they are in clear adolescence, and they start smelling themselves, and boys more than anyone else. And so we have to keep our arms on them a lot closer at that point, and that's the point when they're pushing away, and it's the point when parenting is much more important. And it is no different than what I experienced with my young son. So what we're trying to do at that point is establish ways of making sure we know what's going on with our children going from 8th to 9th grade. We've established programs in Chicago Public Schools that brings them into the high schools while they're in 8th grade. We've established programs that gets them in during the summertime so that the transition is much easier when they get there in the fall. We recognize that if a student misses 10 days in a course, they're going to fail. If they fail 2 courses, they're 60% more likely not to graduate from high school. And so we're intervening as early as we can with data to understand where our students are at those points and remediate immediately so that we lessen the likelihood that they will drop out. Attendance matters, and so we've got to stay on that until we get through it. It's kind of interesting as we look at the gaps, and I pointed out where we were as the black students. The top of the list are the Asian students. Asian students in 8th grade, their attendance is 98%. At 9th grade, their attendance drops also. It drops all the way down to 93%. And by the time they graduate from high school, it drops a little bit more. It drops all the way down to 92%. And so there is no surprise that they're the ones who are leading the pack in academic achievement. And we've got to understand what takes place in those communities and try to impose the same kind of disciplines in ours. And basically, from what I see, it's 3 things, and I'll stop here. 1, they respect authority. 2, they revere education. And 3, they work hard. Thank you.
Good morning. It's such an honor to come here today and be able to talk about a subject matter that's so deep inside of me. It's amazing that you can do something that's a passion that now people pay you to do it. I can bear witness that if your heart is right, the Creator will create a path for you to do the work that you want to do. I will cite a person who's from my beloved state, South Carolina, when Dr. Tolson talked about my home state, it is a very hot state. I can bear witness to it. And it's a very poor state. It's one of 3 states in America with 30% black. Mr. Obama owes my beloved South Carolina if he wins. I will say, and this one, I believe this gentleman is one of the greatest educators of the 20th century, and his name is Dr. Benjamin E. Mays. And he says, whatever you do it so good that no man dead, alive, or yet to be born can do it that any better. It's the excellence that came in our community, but sometimes in our community it seems lost. You have to search for it. The educational system historically, my students and I have comprehensively looked at the research literature for 50 years. It has failed us. Some of us have been able to overcome the odds and achieve in spite of, but too many have not been able to achieve in spite of. Our greatest civil rights issue in the 21st century is an education. You can't engage in democracy at the highest level without an education. And I'm not talking about an education that the school just gives you. One great scholar says one of the responsibilities of the family is to educate their kids and teach them how to survive in the society in which they were born, and to teach them the traditions. So often, so many of our young men, and I travel all around the country working with urban, rural, and suburban school districts. Some young men don't even know who Martin Luther King is. I don't blame the school system for that. We must take back our kids, because we know, even when you control for SES, parents, family still play a critical role in school outcomes. Even if you grew up in the hood of Newark, New Jersey, or where you grew up in the rural south of South Carolina, parents still play a critical role in that process. There's a few variables that my colleagues in the Ivory Tower have found that predict with almost 90% accuracy at the 3rd grade that students will drop out if they possess one of these variables. Reading 1 year below grade level, just 1 year, have been retained once, come from a low SES background, and attend a school with at least 50% or more of the kids live in poverty. With 90% accuracy, it's almost a guarantee that they would drop out of school. Now, me born in the South and growing up in the Bible Belt, we don't always believe in statistics, because I come from working class, I'm black and I'm male, and I'm from the worst educational system in America. Who would ever believe I would be at Ohio State University? You know who believed it? My family, my community believed it. What we have to do, there are some things. First, we have to understand education will never come knocking on your door. You have to thirst and yearn for it. I'm one of the few scholars, there's about 4 of us in the whole United States who focus on gifted, black scholars who focus on gifted and talented students. So when you come to our conference, just like if I go in the gifted and talented classes, they're all white. You come to the conferences, all the black, all the scholars are white. And what we found is that the kids have the capacity, but the environment is very chilly. And you would almost think when you go into urban centers, most of our urban centers are predominantly black and brown, but it amazes me when I go into their gifted and talented classes, some of those classes are predominantly white. It's mind-boggling when we think about it. But I'm going to be really quickly, a few things that I would like for us to put on the table that we found that promote pro-academic behaviors. And this is based on a esteemed colleague, and he's retired numerous times, one of the founders of Head Start, Dr. Edwin Gordon. He says, access to education-relevant capital. You can grow up in the hood. We know a lot of people who grew up in the hood. We all can cite someone who grew up in the hood who achieved, but they had access to dentists, black doctors. They had access to capital that made a difference. Supportive family and community and academic environments. You know, you come back home with me in the Old South when they talk about segregated schools, they talk about Miss Johnson or Miss such and such, how she was so integrated in their lives beyond the schools. So supportive environment. Socialization to the attitudinal and behavioral demands of high academic achievement. How can we help create a scholarly identity for young men? Just like they create athletic identities. You know, the young men who think they're going to the pros, they look like they're going to go to pros. But how can we create an academic identity where they look like they're going to progress through schools? Academic and social integration. If you ever heard of a great sociologist, if you studied classic sociology, his name is Emile Durkheim. He coined the theory of suicide. And he says there's a high probability you'll commit suicide if you're not integrated in society. We got young men who go to school every day who have already dropped out of school because they're not engaged in the classroom. Exposure to various forms of supplementary education. One of the things that the greatest achievement gap, if you leave here and you remember anything, is not the low income levels. The achievement gap is stable. It's the people who live where I live in Fairfax County and Montgomery County. Why don't black folks who make $100,000, why aren't their achievements comparable to their counterparts? The gap is larger at the high SES. It's mind-boggling. And the last one is exposure to models of academic excellence and exemplars of scholarly practice. We know TRIO works. We know pre-college initiatives that the National Society of Black Engineers work. We need more of those programs. Thank you.
Good morning. It's been my pleasure and very interesting to be able to sit up here and listen to these four brothers talk about these issues very fluently. And as I hear them speak, they each talk about something different within one capacity. And no matter how different what they're saying is, they're very closely related. And what I'm hearing is microsystems. Each person is made up of multiple microsystems. That may be your family, the school, the environment, your church. Many microsystems make up one individual as forming an identity. And who this identity is will oftentimes dictate what you do with yourself. Unfortunately, many African American adolescent males are at a struggle with their identity for multiple reasons. One may be just a conflict within microsystems, home and school, environment and home, church and environment. And another reason just may be because where we would like them to see them go in life and where they may want to go in life, they don't have an example of an African American male in that place. When they go to school, they don't see an African American male teaching. They don't correlate education with being part of the identity of an African American or part of the identity of a male. So these two conflicts are, putting them at odds. I've worked in the public school setting, I've worked in the jail setting, and it's very sad when you walk into either one and after being there for an amount of time have to check yourself on where you actually are. Being in the jail and thinking, well, am I in the school? Or being in the school and thinking, well, I'm in the jail for various reasons, whether it's walking through metal detectors, getting patted down in the hallways, or whether it's just the whole environment of the school where kids are running in and out of the classroom, no one can keep them in the classroom, walk on the third floor and it smells like marijuana. So these are all issues that I think that everybody is talking about and need to be targeted on individual level as well as a systemic level. Thank you.
all of you. There are index cards being floated around right now for your questions. We're going to reach the Q&A period pretty soon. In a panel that's going to go on for the length of this one, about 90 minutes, it's my experience that people like to hear different voices. So I don't want to just read everybody's question, but I'll take the index cards, and if you can print your name very clearly, I will select some for you to have this floating mic and ask your question. But before we go into the Q&A section, there's a few things that I'd like the panelists to expound on. I've taken some notes from what they said. And the first question I want to direct to, I want Mark Lamont Hill and Ryan Sutton to speak to this. There are some findings in the Breaking Barriers report, and that's on page 4 of the report. One of the more compelling findings that I found in this report was that black students were more than 500% more likely to pass through a metal detector on their way to school than white students. And another thing that's interesting about that is African American students are also the most likely to feel unsafe at school. When asked about weapons carrying, Hispanic students reported more weapons carrying to school than black students, but yet black students felt the most unsafe at school, even compared to their Hispanic counterparts. Now, we talk a lot about public schools starting to look like prisons and the effect that may have on the entire academic environment. And I remember when I worked at a prison, I worked as a prison psychologist, and one of the first things they told us during training, they said, you are a correctional officer first. And that's because they got a lot of liberal psychologists that would come in there that would actually care about the inmates. And so we wanted to remind us, in case our academic training had made us too soft, that you are a correctional officer first. So if you are in therapy and you hear a body alarm mash, you secure your area and you run to the scene of that. And that created a certain environment, and I wonder if some of the teachers in our public schools are getting that same message. You are a correctional officer first, and you are a teacher second. And when I look at some of the other findings in the report that deals with the relationship students need to have with their teachers in order to succeed, black men who succeed in school significantly are more likely to say that their teacher respects them, treats them as a person, and genuinely cares about them. These are things that correlate highly with academic success. So if we put our kids in an environment where they feel like they're in prison, the teachers are in an environment where they feel like correctional officers, how can we address that? So I know that Mark Lamont Hill talked a little bit about his experiences, and also Ryan Sutton. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think part of the issue here, again, to understand what's going on in school, we have to understand, again, the broader society. And what we see across society is the militarization of public space. Mm-hmm. Right? We see moving away from authority, because we need authority, right? And moving toward authoritarianism, which is a very different thing. And so in a broader public world where you have youth, you have civil injunctions being levied against gangs in California. You have, again, disorderly conduct for kids who do normal classroom behavior, like speaking out against a teacher. You have all this stuff in the broader world that makes it, that predisposes people to thinking about schools as sites of enforcement. And so we replace our language of investment in love with containment and blame. The kids are a problem. Right? How can we contain them? How can we fix them? How can we protect ourselves from them? That's one issue, right? Then you have the rise of zero tolerance policies, which were initially designed for one social purpose and have expanded such that actually they serve almost the opposite purpose. As you mentioned, the schools are the most metal detectors feel least safe. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Chris Rock told me, you go in the club where they search you. You know, he's like, he feels unsafe. He said, because you go, you know, there's people waiting outside with guns and they know you ain't got one. Right? So there's a certain sense in which excessive security and militarization and containment and surveillance actually do the opposite. So that's one issue. Then let's not ignore the elephant in the room of white supremacy. right? Because the twisted, inverted, perverted logic of white supremacy, it shapes people's disposition toward black bodies, so that the very existence of a black body demands lethal force. That's how we get Amadou Diallo. That's how we get Louis. That's how we get Sean Bell, because the very presence of a black body, armed or not, demands a certain type of enforcement. And so in school, black bodies navigate public institutions and are seen as walking threats. That's why you have these things. The other issue is, since the rise of zero tolerance policies, we've seen school discipline radically shift. We've seen what we call net widening, meaning you get in trouble for different things that you used to not get in trouble for. If you look at school discipline, like for example, I'm in Philadelphia, if you look at the school disciplinary codes, the book used to be 5 pages. Now it's like 50. Section A, Section B, then a little Roman numerals under B, then, you know, stuff I didn't even know existed. So now you got like a phone book of disciplinary infractions, so you can get in trouble for more stuff. And then, not only is the net wide, but it's also deeper. There are more penalties, so it's not just the teachers are like correctional officers, you got correctional officers like correctional officers, you got school police, you got real police, you have people who are there just for school discipline infractions, so all that's going on. And then in the midst of that, let's not forget white supremacy. I know I said it, but it bears repeating. Because white supremacy shapes school discipline. Most school disciplinary infractions are not hardcore objective infractions of a rule. You bring a gun to school, you probably should get suspended. That seems reasonable to me. Right? You punch somebody in the face, you should probably get in trouble. Seems reasonable to me. But most infractions are not hardcore violations of a fundamental rule. It's what we call disciplinary moments. Right? Subjective interpretations of behavior. So now we also get the cultural piece. So when black students respond in particular ways, and all the black psychologists for the last 30 years have told us that black bodies and black students simply operate and navigate school differently. We perform differently. We have more verb. We have different affect. Things that may be perfectly normal to us may be seen as threatening. The way in which we interject in a conversation, whether we talk and talk over one another, might be seen as disrupting classroom conversation. And it's not just race, it's also gender. Because even though we're talking about black males, black female behavior, or any female behavior, if a woman does something a man does, she may be seen as disrespectful. When for a male, he's just seen as aggressive. And he's into it. So all of these things shape the way the teacher interprets the disciplinary moment. That's why black boys are overrepresented in the discipline office, and in school suspensions, and in school expulsions, and in special ed, because we know special ed is often seen as another alternative for disciplinary infractions. So people who have perfectly reasonable skills, perfectly high IQs, are still put in special ed. So all of this is part of a broader project of fearing and containing black bodies. And school just becomes another site for this. So I think that's the key issue here. And so I think just to talk a little bit about solutions real fast, obviously we need professional development, we need to retrain teachers, we need to start at the level of teacher education as well. We need to think about how we teach teachers how to teach us. They say you have to teach somebody how to teach you, how to treat you. We have to reimagine school, we have to reimagine the actual practice of pedagogy. Even some of my Afrocentric brothers, even some of my progressive white brothers and sisters, they say, well, let's throw hip-hop in, or let's throw African-centered education in. And that can actually become a red herring, because now all of a sudden we think that if we just throw a new curriculum in, one size fits all, that's the same thing Bush and the No Child Left Behind people saying. Right? If we can throw a different curriculum in, that'll be okay. But no, we need engaged pedagogy. We need culturally responsive teaching and learning. We need culturally responsive classroom management and classroom discipline. And we need to take back our schools. And that's what these brothers have been talking about this whole time. We need to actually get back in there and have a hand in this, because the reality is your kid will get suspended less if you come to school. Your kid will get a higher grade. Statistically, your kid's going to go just for you showing up. Because for no other reason, but they're tired of seeing you. It's easy just to, I taught high school, and I remember it was just easy to give this kid a D, because I didn't want to see his mama come up in house shoes again. So, I mean, straight up, right? So there's a whole process that we need to understand that relates to culture, to economy, to issues of power, and I'm going to say it one more time, white supremacy.
Self-fulfilling prophecy comes to mind when I think of the issue on two levels. One on a systemic level being the schools, and one on the individual level being the student. As far as the schools are concerned, our constant talk about the school becoming like the jails, our schools looking like the jails, can actually turn the schools into a jail, whether it be more security officers or COs, correctional officers, or more metal detectors when you walk through the door. When these youths wake up in the morning, you don't know what they're coming from. Many of them probably didn't wake up to an alarm. Their alarm was a police siren coming down the street, or an ambulance. So already their day started off horrible. They woke up with a reminder of where they are and what's going on in the world, where many other people maybe wake up to an alarm and the smell of coffee and bacon, and the world's great, it's beautiful, flowers. But that's not their reality, and people aren't realizing that. So when they get up, they're already in a certain mind state. And I think we're only perpetuating that mind state when you walk through a metal detector at your school, this place where you've been told by your grandmother or your mother or your father that this is a place you need to attend to better yourself. I have to attend a place that I have to walk through a metal detector and have fear of somebody else carrying a gun, because that's what it's saying. If we have to walk through a metal detector, I need to have fear of someone in the school has a gun or a knife, or else there will be no reason for this metal detector. And if that's the case, I need to have a gun or a knife in order to protect me against those with a gun or a knife, just in case they get through a metal detector. Working in the public schools, I noticed like they have fire alarms and tornado alarms to practice. With the teachers, they actually had, in case a fight breaks out or a shooting, this is what should be done, doors locked, drills and practicing along those lines. A fight actually broke out in school to the point where the teachers went, they locked their doors, and all the security guards ran to the fight, leaving all the doors open in the school, meaning that people were running in off the streets with whatever weapons in order to participate in the fight or perpetuate it. And this also putting more fear into the students. So this self-fulfilling prophecy on a systemic level can actually hurt the adolescent or the young adult's mindset and what they're actually in school for, making them possibly not even want to attend school, much less relate to school or have a school bond. Because I've seen in research where the school bond that the student shares with the school actually is an indicator of their academic success, which also could be an academic indicator of whether they'll be involved in the juvenile justice system. Also, on that same level, we have self-fulfilling prophecy on the individual level, where students, teachers may not be respecting the students, or the students may feel that they're not being respected by the teachers, whether that's true or not. And one reason that this may come across is the lack of cultural diversity, cultural issues, more cultural trainings within the teachers that are in those positions. A lot of times we get teachers that were offered some program that would pay back their student loans if they would just go into these poor urban schools and teach. They stay there a year just to get their loans paid off and they move on to somewhere else, or they use that opportunity to build up their resume. And can't really point fingers at them because they're doing what they need to do, but also I think there needs to be more education in the training of teachers to go into the cultural realm. I know Howard has a major study going on right now called the STEM study, and they're actually looking at STEM students, science, technology, engineering, and math students, and trying to figure out what reasons, how, or why do our black African-American students go on to become statisticians or engineers, and we're not getting very many of us in the school systems as teachers in order to try to figure out that disparity as well as turn it around. So hopefully the issue of cultural diversity can be addressed through more research like that.
I have to address this issue.
Okay.
I hate going into a high school and walking through a metal detector. I detest going into an elementary school and walking through a metal detector. I know what that does to the psyche of our children. I know that. Whenever the question is asked, if you feel safe in school, and the answer is no, the follow-up question must be, where do you feel safe? What is our reality? This is my reality. In Chicago, from September of last year to September of this year, 300 children were shot. That's my reality. My reality is over 30 children were killed. The other reality is none of that happened in a school. So when you think about the fact that we have metal detectors and children don't feel safe in school, the question is, where do you feel safe? There were children who were killed at home getting ready to go to school when an errant gunshot came through the front window. This is a much bigger issue than what takes place in the school building. What is the chicken and what is the egg? Which comes first, and what is it that we need to truly eradicate? What is the source of these issues? One thing that's clear to me is if these shootings were happening between races, it would stop. There would be an all-out war. The reality is, it is black folks shooting black folks and Latinos shooting Latinos. And if we can deal with that issue, then we can deal with the issue of not having the metal detectors and not trying to keep the places where we have to free these children's minds so they can absorb what we're trying to get there in a way in which they can do that. So it's unfortunate that they don't feel safe in school. And whenever I hear that, I ask the why. Because nothing over the last several years, 3 or 4 years, has happened in the school buildings in Chicago. It is happening outside. Let me say one other thing.
Okay.
I would have said this earlier when your brother at the end brought it up, but there were researchers at Johns Hopkins that talked about the fact that there's a direct, linear, perfect relationship between the high school poverty level and the tendency to lose large numbers of students between 9th and 12th grades. I gave you the statistics, the demographics of our school system, but this study also said minorities are likely concentrated in high schools with high poverty and low graduation rates. All these things are so directly connected that unless we can figure out the bigger societal issues, I think, without having, well, I've studied it enough, the issue is jobs, the issue is gangs, the issue is drugs, the issue is guns that go with all those things that create all of these other issues that require us to have metal detectors in our schools so that our children can be safe. That is the very first thing that any parent wants to know when a child is out of their sight.
Right. Right. Very, very important discussion. I want to direct this next question to Brother McCall. You said in your opening remarks, you mentioned masculinity and our perception of masculinity, which is something that we need to think about in the lens of academic achievement. And that brought to mind another finding of the study, and I want you to speak to this finding related to that. On page 16 of the study, this is actually on page 16 and 17. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Get one. Can we get the panelists? Got to open it. Someone bring the panelists a couple of copies of the report. Thank you. So on page 16, I looked at a number of factors, a number of mental health and emotional factors, and I did a regression analysis, an exploratory regression analysis to determine which one of these factors had the highest relationship with academic achievement for these school-aged African-American males. And looking at one data set, an indicator called quality of life came up as the highest emotional indicator. And the question that was asked to derive of quality of life is, in general, how do you feel about your life at present? And the range is, I'm not happy at all, to I feel very happy. And so this, you can almost call it a happiness variable. The happier these black males said that they were, the more they were likely to do well in school. Now the second data set that I looked at on page 17, they asked the question pointedly, how often have you been happy? And when I looked at the relationship between happiness and positive engagement in school across genders, there's and if you're looking at it on page 17, thank you. If you're looking at it on page 17, with black males, there's a spike. When they say that they feel happy, they have a much higher probability of doing well in school. With black females, there's a slight incline, but not so much. So that indicates that black females are more so able to withstand periods of not being happy and still do well in school. But with black males, their success in school is almost dependent upon their happiness. Now, when we think about masculinity, we know that sometimes happiness and masculinity, they don't really go that well. A lot of times when you have stereotyped masculine behaviors, you are kind of gruff. You with a grit. You seem more angry than happy. So with those findings, Brother McCall, I'd like you to kind of speak to the issues of masculinity and what we might need to do for these young black men.
Well, let me just share with you some aspects of my personal trajectory and journey that I think relate to the whole masculinity issue and school and education. The internal piece, a lot of the brothers talked about the systemic problems that are impacting young black men in terms of being discouraging for them. But there's also an internal piece, something that happens for us during our journey through school. And it happened for me. In elementary school, I was an honor roll student, loved school. By junior high school, something started happening. A couple of things started happening. One, I began paying attention to issues of masculinity. You know, who was respected in school and why. And the people who were respected were those who could fight, the brothers who were hanging on the corner, you know, the brothers who were popular and cool. And I began paying attention to those things. Interestingly enough, I grew up in a household with my mother and my stepfather. And so you could say, well, he had a strong black male in the household. Why didn't he emulate him? My stepfather worked. He worked 2 jobs. And one of the jobs was as a gardener. I wrote about this in my autobiography. He worked as a gardener, and he would take us across town, and my brothers and me, when I was about 11, 12 years old, and we would work in white people's gardens. And for me, the sight of my stepfather, who was like 6'2", down on his hands and knees working in white people's gardens, felt too much like pictures that I had seen in history books of slaves picking cotton. Now, keep in mind, I looked at this through the prism of a 12-year-old, an immature 12-year-old, who was just beginning to deal with masculinity issues and who became confused about masculinity issues. As an adult now, I understand that my stepfather was being a real man. He was doing what he had to do in order to support his family. And if it meant working 2 jobs, he worked 2 jobs. But as an adolescent, I didn't understand that, and he didn't represent what I viewed as a real man. But when I looked out at the brothers who were hanging on the block, they represented real men to me. They were beginning to make the fast money. You know, they were clean, had nice shoes on every day. They were getting attention from the ladies. And I began equating that with masculinity as opposed to what I saw in my stepfather, and rejected him as a role model and began embracing the model of the brothers who were hanging on the block. By the time I got to high school, I was hanging on the block, and the guys that I was hanging with, when we reached 10th grade, we did sort of a ceremonial of quitting school. We were skipping classes one day, and all of them, one of them said, "Man, I'm tired of this. I'm going to quit." And he dumped his books in the trash can. And everybody else who was with us followed suit. And so when it came my turn, I kept my books. I kept my books. I knew I couldn't go home without those books. You know? And so what I did was my version of a compromise. They quit school and left. I knew my parents wouldn't let me quit school. So I would hang on the corner, and I wouldn't let the brothers see me carrying books. And so I'd hang on the corner until the last brother was about to leave, and then I would go home late at night, sleepy and tired, and try to do my homework. And so I tried to play both sides of the fence. And, because masculinity at that point was very, very important to me. And I was very, very confused at that point. I carried a gun in school from 10th grade until the time I graduated. Because of the safety issue. This was before the metal detectors. And they would search your lockers from time to time. Well, to make a long story short, you can't play both sides of the fence, and I ended up being arrested for armed robbery and was sent to prison. Was sentenced to serve 12 years. It wasn't the first felony offense. I had been arrested the year before for shooting a guy. And so I had 2 gun charges, and the judge came down hard and gave me 12 years. It was in prison that I began to view education and books very differently than I viewed them when I was in high school. When I was in high school, as I told you, I was afraid for people to see me with books. In prison, I began reading, and it was reading people like Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X, Blood in My Eye by George Jackson, that I began to see that you could be masculine, challenging, you could be a man, and intelligent at the same time. And in fact, that if you nurture intelligence, you can become even more empowered. That was a major transformation that accounts for me beginning to move my life in a different direction. But I would not have made that transformation had I not somehow been able to equate the whole notion of education with masculinity. Why is masculinity so important for young black men? We know. Historically, our reality has been about the system trying to emasculate us. It became systematized during slavery, and it was transferred through generations. And so black men, as a response to that, have always tried to defy that emasculation, and in many ways we have gone to the other extreme and overcompensated. And so I think that's where we are now. And so one of the important things that I think we have to be able to do is find some ways, and what I do when I talk to young black men is I try to equate the two. I say, it's okay if you want to be bad. You want to be bad? I wanted to be bad. You want to be bad? I tell you what, come on, put on a suit and tie. Let's get up early in the morning and take on Dick Cheney and George Bush and the real gangsters.
That's it.
That's it. I tell them, you want to be a gangster? Come on. Come on. Come on. Let's be a gangster. Let's take on the real gangsters. All right? And quite often when I say that and look into an audience of black men, a lot of them don't hold my gaze. They don't want to take on that challenge because it is a masculine challenge,
Yeah. Wow.